The plate hit the floor before the nanny could catch it. Not dropped, thrown, with the specific force of a 5-year-old who has made a decision and is not interested in discussing it. The rice and groundnut soup spread across the kitchen tiles of the Diallo compound in a slow, deliberate arc, and Nadia stood in the middle of it all with her arms folded and her chin up and her expression communicating with complete clarity that this matter was settled. The nanny's name was Serene. She was the 7th in 9 weeks. She had arrived on a Monday with excellent references from 3 families in the Plateau district and a calm professional manner that suggested she could handle difficult situations. She had lasted 11 days. Tierno Diallo stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching the soup spread. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with the kind of face that had developed permanent lines not from age, but from the specific work of holding everything together after his world had reorganized itself around a loss he had not expected and had not been prepared for. He ran Diallo Holdings from an office on the 4th floor of a building his father had built, and he had sat across tables from ministers and bank governors and never once looked uncertain. He was uncertain now. Serene looked at him over the child's head. Her expression said what her professionalism prevented her from saying aloud. "Nadia," Tierno said, "look at me." Nadia turned her chin up another degree. She was 5 years and 4 months old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jaw and a capacity for stubbornness that appeared to have come from somewhere entirely her own. She looked at him without softening. "The rice," he said. "It was not right. It was the same rice I made yesterday and you ate it." "Yesterday it was different," Nadia said. Her voice was completely certain. "I could feel it was different." Tierno closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He opened them. He looked at Serene, whose resignation was already visible in the set of her shoulders before she said anything. She quit the next morning. This was how 9 weeks had gone. Each nanny had come recommended, qualified, experienced. Each had applied their skills with genuine effort. Each had been rejected by a 5-year-old with the precision of a quality inspector. Tierno had asked Nadia, after the 4th departure, what specifically she did not like. Nadia had thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything, and had said, "They try too hard." He had not fully understood this at the time. He thought he understood it better now. They came with methods and strategies and carefully developed approaches designed for children in general. Nadia was not interested in being approached in general. She required something more specific, something he could not name and could not hire for, because he did not know what it was called. He had asked Madame Queso if she would take on more care for Nadia. Madame Queso had looked at him with the expression of a woman who has managed a household for 22 years and is not going to pretend the question did not need careful thought. She had said that Nadia allowed her presence and that she could manage the mornings and evenings, but that what the child needed was not management. Tierno had not argued because Madame Queso was right. What Nadia needed he had not yet been able to provide. He was not failing her on purpose. He was failing her in the specific way that capable people fail at things they do not yet know how to do, which is with full effort and insufficient result and no clear path between the two. Tierno sat in his home office that evening after Nadia had been put to bed by the housekeeper Madame Queso, who was 61 years old and had worked for the Diallo family for 22 years, and who Nadia tolerated but did not love, which meant the child would sleep but not settle. He sat at his desk and looked at the short list his assistant Bertrand had prepared of available nannies and childcare professionals in Abidjan, and he thought about his wife Simone and what she would have said about all of this. Simone would have laughed first. She always laughed first. Then she would have picked up Nadia and talked to her for 20 minutes in the low, gentle voice that had worked on the child the way nothing else did, and by the end of the 20 minutes, whatever the problem was, would have been resolved, not solved exactly, but dissolved, made smaller by the specific combination of warmth and honesty that Simone had carried in her like weather. Simone had been gone for 2 years. Nadia had been 3 when she died. Old enough to understand that something had been removed from the center of her world. Not old enough to understand what came next. What came next had been Tierno learning, slowly and badly, how to be both parents at once. It was the most difficult thing he had ever done. More difficult than building the holding company to its current size. More difficult than the year of legal disputes over his father's estate. More difficult than anything that could be managed with money or intelligence, or the kind of controlled competence he had spent 15 years cultivating. Children did not respond to competence. They responded to something else entirely, and Tierno was still working out what that was. He closed the short list without making a decision. The next morning he took Nadia out, not for a reason. not to a destination, just out, the way he did sometimes when the compound felt too large and too quiet and Nadia had that particular withdrawn look that meant she was disappearing into herself. He put her in the back seat of the car and told his driver Umar to go toward the Treichville market and then keep going. No plan, just the road and the morning and the Abidjan traffic organizing itself around them. Nadia sat against the window. She was wearing a yellow dress and her hair in two puffs. She watched the city go past with the focused attention she brought to everything. She was a perceptive child. She noticed things. This was one of the things Tierno loved about her, and also one of the things that made parenting her very difficult because you could not present her with a version of reality that was incomplete and expect her to accept it. She would find the missing piece and ask about it directly. Umar slowed for a traffic stop near the Ajame fabric market. The road was busy with the particular organized chaos of a Abidjan morning. Vendors, pedestrians, motorbikes threading between vehicles. Calls and responses, and the smell of food from somewhere nearby, and the sound of a radio playing from an open window above the road. "Daddy," Nadia said. "Look." He followed her finger. On the side of the road, slightly back from the main foot traffic, a woman had set up a small workspace. She had a low table with fabric spread across it, a manual sewing machine beside her on a wooden stand, and several garments hanging from a line strung between two poles. She was working with her head down, fingers moving through a seam with the particular confidence of someone who does this with their eyes closed if necessary. She was maybe 26. Her wrapper was bright orange and blue. Her hair was covered with a cloth. She worked with a focused calm that was visible from the car. A girl maybe 3 years old sat on a small mat beside her, talking to a doll in the serious voice that children use when they are conducting important business. "What about her?" Tierno said. "She's fixing something," Nadia said. "Look at her hands." Tierno looked. The woman's hands were moving steadily, precisely, unhurried. She was pressing a folded edge flat while she worked, and there was something in the gesture that was both practical and careful, the gesture of a person who does not rush the parts that matter. Nadia had unfastened her seatbelt before he registered what she was doing. "Nadia." He reached back. She was already opening the door. The car was stationary in traffic. She was out before he could stop her, stepping onto the road with the absolute conviction of a 5-year-old who has decided the situation requires her presence. Tierno got out behind her. The woman looked up from her work when she heard small footsteps approaching and found Nadia standing in front of her table looking at the fabric with large, serious eyes. "Hello," the woman said. She said it warmly, without alarm, the way people respond to small children who appear unexpectedly in their workspace. "What are you looking for?" "Nothing," Nadia said. "I just wanted to see what you were making." The woman turned the fabric slightly so Nadia could see the seam she had been working. "It's a blouse," she said, "for a woman who is getting married next week. It has to be perfect." Nadia leaned closer. The fabric was pale gold with embroidered detail along the neckline. She reached out one finger and touched it, very gently. "It's beautiful," Nadia said. The woman smiled. "Thank you." Tierno had reached them. He was standing a few feet back, watching. The woman looked up at him with a calm, assessing glance and then returned her attention to Nadia. She did not look flustered by the presence of an expensive car or a man in clothes that cost more than her weekly earnings. She was simply present and focused in the way that confident people are. "Is this your daughter?" the woman asked Tierno. "Yes," he said. "She has good eyes for fabric," the woman said. "She touched it the right way." She looked at Nadia. "Do you sew?" "No," Nadia said, "but I want to." The woman looked at her for a moment. Then she moved slightly on her low stool, making space, and said, "Come and sit here and I will show you one thing." Nadia sat beside her without any hesitation. Without the assessment, the resistance, the careful measuring that she brought to every adult she encountered. She simply sat. Tierno watched this. He watched his daughter, who had rejected 7 nannies in 9 weeks and thrown food at 2 of them and once locked herself in her room for 4 hours rather than speak to a childcare professional with 20 years of experience, sit down beside a woman she had known for 40 seconds, and lean slightly in to watch what her hands were doing. The woman's name was Fatou Kamara. She told them this when Tierno finally introduced himself, which he did with less authority than he usually brought to introductions, because the situation did not seem to require authority. It seemed to require something quieter. She told them she had been sewing since she was 8, that her mother had been a seamstress in Bouaké and had taught her, that she had come to Abidjan 4 years ago and set up this roadside workspace after she could not secure the kind of employment she had originally come for. She said this plainly, without asking for sympathy, just as information about how her life had arranged itself. She had come to Abidjan for a position at a fashion house in Cocody that had been arranged through a contact which had not materialized in the form she expected. She had found the roadside workspace and had built something real from what was available, which was not what she had planned, but was, as she said to Tierno when he asked further, still a living made with her own hands in her own way, and that was not a small thing. She had regulars. Women who came back season after season for specific garments she could make that nobody else in the market made the same way. She had a waiting list for wedding season. She had turned away work twice in the past year because there was more of it than she could manage alone. She said none of this to impress. She said it the way she said everything, as accurate information about what was true. She fed Nadia a small piece of fried plantain from the cloth bag she kept under the table. Nadia ate it. Tierno watched his daughter eat plantain from a stranger's bag on the side of a road in Ajame and said nothing, because the alternative was to stop it, and stopping it would require disrupting whatever was happening, and whatever was happening was the first time in 2 years that Nadia had eaten something offered by someone she had not known for months. When they had to leave, Nadia stood up and looked at Fatu with the expression she reserved for things she had decided mattered. "I will come back," Nadia said. Fatu smiled at her. "You know where I am." Nadia turned to Tierno. "She can be my nanny," she said. The statement was not a request. Tierno looked at Fatu, who was already back to her work, straightening the gold fabric with both hands. She had not heard, or had chosen not to respond to, what Nadia had said. "We will talk," he told Nadia. "Before we go any further into this story, go and check the pinned comment under this video right now. Our Facebook page link is sitting there. Follow us before you scroll past, because what Tierno finds out in the weeks ahead is the part of this story that changes everything. Go and follow us, then come back." Tierno returned alone the next morning. Without Nadia, without Umar, in his personal vehicle, parking 2 streets away and walking to the market the way ordinary people walked to ordinary places. He had thought about what he was going to say during the drive and had found that none of the versions felt right. He was a man who negotiated contracts worth billions of francs, and he did not know how to ask a roadside tailor if she would consider caring for his daughter. He stood in front of her workspace for a moment before she looked up. "You came back," Fatu said, "without the child." "She ate the plantain you gave her," he said. "She doesn't eat from people she doesn't trust." Fatu put down the garment she was working on. She looked at him with the same calm, direct attention she had given the gold fabric. "Something happened to her," she said. "The child." "Yes. Her mother died 2 years ago." Fatu was quiet for a moment. "I know what that does to a small person," she said, not as performance of sympathy, as a statement of fact, the kind that comes from a person who knows from the inside. Tierno said, "I want to offer you work, caring for her, in my home." He said it plainly because he had decided plain was better than strategic. "The salary would be 3 times what you earn here monthly." "I know that sounds like I am using money to simplify something complicated." Fatu looked at her workspace. The sewing machine, the hanging garments, the small mat where the girl had been sitting, now empty because the child was at her neighbor's house while Fatu worked. "That child is yours?" Tierno asked. "My niece," Fatu said. "I look after her during the week. She goes home on Fridays." She paused. "My sister works long hours." Tierno waited. "The child, Nadia," Fatu said. "She sees things. She was watching my hands yesterday, and she saw exactly what I was doing. Most adults walk past me and see nothing. Their 5-year-old looked for 3 minutes and understood." She picked up her work again. "That kind of perception is rare. It usually means the child is very present in the world. Children who are very present are often very alone." Tierno looked at her. He had not expected this analysis. He had expected questions about the salary or the working hours or whether there were other staff. "She is alone," he said. "In the way you mean." Fatu said, "I will come and meet her first, properly, in her own space, where she feels like herself. If she is still comfortable with me after that, then I will consider your offer. But I will not commit to anything just because yesterday went well." Yesterday was a moment. A home is not a moment. He nodded. "When can you come?" She thought about it. "Saturday morning." She came on Saturday with a small bag and the same orange and blue wrapper and a calm that did not shift when she walked through the gate of the Diallo compound and saw the size of it. Madame Kesso opened the gate. The 2 women assessed each other with the specific efficiency of people who understand immediately what kind of conversation they are in. Nadia was in the garden. She had been told Fatu was coming and had been outside since 7 in the morning, which was an hour earlier than she usually appeared. She was sitting on the low wall with her doll and her focused expression, waiting. When she saw Fatu at the garden entrance, she stayed where she was. She did not run. She watched. Fatu walked to her slowly and sat on the wall beside her, not touching, not speaking immediately. She looked at the garden. She said after a moment, "That tree in the corner, what is it called?" Nadia looked at the tree. Mango. But it doesn't have mangoes yet. Papa says in 2 months. 2 months is not long for a mango tree, Fatu said. They make you wait every time. Nadia thought about this. Then she said, did you bring your sewing? I did. Do you want to try? Yes. They sat together in the garden for 2 hours. Fatu taught Nadia how to thread a needle, how to hold fabric flat while you worked, how to make a straight stitch, and why the tension of the thread mattered. Nadia was precise and focused and asked 11 questions, each more specific than the last. By the end of the morning, she had sewn a small, uneven square of white cotton and was holding it with the expression of a person who has made something for the first time and cannot quite believe the thing exists. At noon, Madame Kesso brought food to the garden. Nadia ate without being asked. Tierno had been watching from the upstairs window. He had not come down. He had understood without being told that his presence was not needed in this particular morning. He stood at the window and watched his daughter eat lunch in the garden with a woman she had known for 2 days and felt something shift in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. It was relief partially, but it was also something that was not relief, something warmer and more inconvenient. Fatu officially moved into the compound the following Monday. She had 1 bag and a wooden box of sewing tools and a clarity about the terms of the arrangement that Tierno found unexpected and appreciated. She told him, in their formal discussion in his office, that she would care for Nadia during the hours agreed, that she would maintain her honesty with the child about all things, that she would not make promises she could not keep, and that she would tell him immediately if any situation arose that was beyond what she could handle. She said this looking at him directly, not nervously, not performing confidence, just stating terms. He agreed to all of them. The change in the compound was gradual and then complete. Within the first week, the mornings were different. Nadia woke up at a regular hour. She ate. She did not throw things. She sat with Fatu in the garden and learned 2 more stitches and told Fatu about her mother in the way children tell things, in pieces and without apparent order, the details arriving when they arrived rather than assembled into a narrative. Fatu listened to all of it. Tierno heard this from Madame Kesso, who heard it from observing. He did not ask Nadia directly. He understood that what was happening in the garden was not for him to manage. He found himself in the garden anyway, not by plan. He would come home from the office, and rather than going to his study, he would find his feet taking him toward wherever Nadia and Fatu were. He told himself he was checking on his daughter. He was not only checking on his daughter. Fatu was not what he had expected, which he recognized was an unfair formulation because he had not known enough about her to expect anything. But she surprised him consistently. She had opinions about things and stated them without preamble. She had a way of listening that was fully present, not polite but genuine, where her attention was actually on you rather than on the response she was preparing. She made him laugh twice in the first week without trying to make him laugh, which was the only way he had ever found genuinely funny things funny. He noticed these things the way you notice things you are trying not to notice, with the specific clarity that comes from the attempt at suppression. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, they were both in the garden after Nadia had gone inside. He had brought 2 glasses of water. He had not been planning to stay, but he sat on the low wall, and she sat beside him, and they talked until the mosquitoes arrived at dusk without either of them registering the time passing. She told him about Buake, about her mother's atelier, the small sewing room at the back of their house, where she had spent entire childhood afternoons learning technique and patience in roughly equal measure. She told him about coming to Abidjan 4 years ago with a specific plan that had not survived contact with the realities of the city. She had come for a position at a fashion house in Kokody that had been described to her by a cousin. The position had not materialized in the form she expected. She had found the roadside workspace and built something from what was available and had been doing that ever since. What had you expected? Tierno asked. She looked at the garden. Something my father would have been proud of, she said. He was a man who believed you should arrive somewhere that justified the work you had put in. Is he still alive? No, she said. He died 5 years ago. He was not old. She said this with the careful evenness of someone who has processed something difficult and come to terms with the processing, taking a long time. Business trouble at the end. He had a partner who was not honest. He lost most of what he had built. It made him very tired. Tierno looked at her. What was your father's business? Import and trade, she said. Fabric and manufacturing supplies mostly. He had a partner he had worked with for many years. When things went wrong, it went wrong suddenly and completely. She shrugged slightly. I do not know all the details. He did not talk about it, only that a man he had trusted for 15 years had taken something from him that could not be given back. Tierno was quiet. He went to his study after the conversation. He sat at his desk for a long time without opening his laptop. He thought about what Fatou had said. He thought about his own father, Ibrahima Diallo, who had died 3 years ago at 71 and left behind a holding company, a compound in Kokadi, a summer house in Assini, and a sealed box of personal documents that Tierno had not yet opened because opening the box had felt like the final acknowledgement of something he was not ready for. His father had been a complicated man in the way that successful men often are. He had built things that mattered, and he had not always been careful about how he built them. Tierno had known this at some level without examining it directly, the way children of powerful parents know things without forming them into thoughts. His father had been generous with family and demanding with business, and Tierno had understood these as separate categories of the same person. He had not thought about where the money came from. He had simply grown up in the space that the money made. The box was still in the third drawer of the filing cabinet behind his desk. He opened the filing cabinet. He looked at the box. He closed the filing cabinet. He sat at his desk until midnight and then went to bed. He opened the box 4 days later. It had been 3 years. He had told himself he would do it when the time felt right. The time had not felt right. What it felt now was different. It felt necessary in a way he could not entirely explain to himself. The box contained, as he had expected, personal correspondence from his father's early years, photographs, the deed to a property in Bouaké that Tierno had not known existed, and a large envelope sealed with brown tape that was labeled, in his father's handwriting, administrative. He opened the administrative envelope. Inside was a set of legal documents from 1997, a business partnership agreement, account records, a series of letters, and at the bottom, a formal notification of dissolution of partnership dated December 1998, signed by Ibrahima Diallo as sole continuing partner. The name of the dissolved partner was written on the agreement in the formal typeface of the notary. The name was Boubacar Kamara. Tierno put the papers down on his desk. He picked them up again. Boubacar Kamara. He read it twice, 3 times, the way you read something when your mind is telling you that the reading cannot be right, that you have made an error in understanding, that the letter forms must mean something else. He went through the documents carefully. It took him 2 hours. The partnership had been in import and trade, fabric and manufacturing supplies, established in 1983. His father had been the senior partner, Boubacar Kamara the junior partner with a 38% share. The partnership had been profitable for 15 years, and then in 1997, there was a legal restructuring document filed through a notary whose name appeared on several other documents in his father's archive. The restructuring had reclassified Boubacar Kamara's shares as forfeit on the basis of a debt claim against the partnership. The debt claim was documented in the records. The documentation, when Tierno read it closely, was procedurally correct and substantively wrong. The debt had been manufactured, numbers moved in and out of accounts in a sequence that was designed to look like Boubacar Kamara had withdrawn funds he had not withdrawn, creating a liability that justified the forfeiture. His father had taken his business partner's shares, 38% of a partnership worth at that time, enough to have made Boubacar Kamara a comfortable man. He had taken them through documentation that was legally filed and factually false. Tierno sat at his desk in the dark for a long time. He thought about Fatou saying he had a partner he had worked with for 15 years. When things went wrong, it went wrong suddenly and completely. He thought about her saying a man he had trusted for 15 years had taken something from him that could not be given back. He thought about the box sitting in the filing cabinet for 3 years, while the daughter of the man his father had wronged sewed garments on the side of the road in Adjamé and then came into his home and brought his daughter back to herself. He looked at the ceiling. He said nothing to no one. He did not sleep. In the morning, Nadia came to find him in the study before breakfast, which she sometimes did when she woke up and could not settle. She climbed onto the chair beside his desk and looked at him with those perceptive eyes. "Daddy, you look wrong," she said. He looked at his daughter. "Just thinking," he said. "Bad thinking or regular thinking?" He considered this. "Bad thinking that I have to turn into regular thinking," he said. Nadia thought about this seriously. Fatou says that bad thinking and regular thinking are the same thinking. You just have to slow it down until you can see it properly. Tierno looked at his daughter. "When did she say that?" "Yesterday, when I was worried about the school test. She sat with me until the thinking slowed down." Nadia looked at the papers on the desk. She did not ask about them. "Are you coming for breakfast?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "Fatou is making a kwadu." She slid off the chair and went to the door. "Come soon." She was gone. He sat for another moment. Then he gathered the documents, put them back in the envelope, and placed the envelope in the top drawer of his desk rather than the filing cabinet. It needed to be somewhere he could see it. He went to breakfast. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of his life in a specific way he had not experienced before. It was not the difficulty of a crisis, which had a shape and a forward motion. It was the difficulty of knowing something that changed the meaning of everything around him and not yet knowing what to do with that knowledge. He watched Fatu with Nadia. He watched her patience and her consistency and the way she spoke to his daughter as if Nadia's understanding was always the primary consideration. He watched her in the evenings in the garden, sometimes sewing while Nadia did her schoolwork nearby, both of them comfortable in their parallel occupations. He watched her and he knew what was in the top drawer of his desk and he said nothing. He told himself he was waiting until he was certain. He was already certain. He told himself he was waiting until he had a plan. He was avoiding making a plan. He told himself he was waiting until it would not disrupt what was happening, which was the only version of the reason that had any honesty in it, because what was happening was extraordinary and he was afraid of what the truth would do to it. On a Sunday evening in the 5th week, Nadia was in bed early and Tierno and Fatu were sitting in the garden and she said something that made the waiting impossible. She said, "I want to tell you something about my father." He looked at her. She said, "I think about him often when I am here." She looked at the mango tree. He would have found this very strange, his daughter sitting in a compound like this. He was not a wealthy man, but he thought carefully about things. He had principles. She paused. When the business trouble came, he had the option to take legal action. He had evidence that something wrong had been done, but he said that the courts would take years and cost money he did not have and would make him into a person who spent his life fighting instead of living. So he chose to let it go and rebuild from what was left. She looked at Tierno. He died before the rebuilding was finished, but not bitter. That matters to me. He chose not to become bitter. Tierno looked at the garden. He said, "Your father sounds like a man of character." She said he was, more than he was given credit for. Tierno said, "Fatu." He said it and then stopped. She looked at him. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know before I tell you that I have been sitting with this for several weeks, and the delay was my cowardice and not my intention." She was still. He went to the study and got the envelope from the top drawer. He brought it to the garden. He sat down and opened it and placed the relevant documents on the low table between them and walked her through what he had found, what the papers showed, what his father had done in 1998 to a business partner named Boubacar Kamara. He did not look away while he spoke. He said it all. Then he waited. Fatu sat without moving for a long time. She looked at the documents. She picked up the partnership agreement and looked at her father's name in the typeface of the notary. She set it down. She picked up the dissolution document and read it carefully, the way she had watched Nadia read things, moving through it slowly, making sure she understood. Then she set that down too. She said, "How long have you known?" 5 weeks, he said. She stood up. She walked to the far end of the garden near the mango tree and stood with her back to him. He did not follow her. After a long time, she said, "He never recovered. My father. From 1998 until he died, he was always trying to get back to where he had been. He worked without stopping. He built something again, but it never reached what he had lost." She was quiet. "He spent himself trying to give us a decent life." Tierno said nothing. There was nothing he could have said. She turned around. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Her voice was not angry. It was tired. The tiredness of someone who has just understood the shape of a thing they had been living inside without knowing. "I want to restore what was taken," Tierno said, formally through the legal and financial channels. The 38% of what the partnership was worth in 1998, recalculated with accumulated value. "I have already had it assessed." He paused. "It belongs to your family. It has always belonged to your family." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because it is right," he said. "Because I have been sitting in this compound for 3 years with a box in a cabinet, and I spent 3 years not opening it, and the reason I finally opened it was something I cannot fully explain, but which has to do with you and what you have done for my daughter and what that showed me about the kind of person your father raised." He held her gaze. "I cannot give back what your father spent trying to rebuild, but I can give back what was taken from him. And I can tell you clearly that what has grown between us in this house, whatever it is not related to this. This would have been the right thing to do if you had been a stranger." Fatu stood at the end of the garden looking at him. Then she said, "I need to leave. I need time." "Of course," he said. She came to Nadia before she left the compound that evening. She sat with the child in her room and told her she needed to be away for a few days. Nadia looked at her with those perceptive eyes. Is it because of the thinking? Nadia asked. The bad thinking that has to become regular thinking? Yes, Fatu said. Exactly that. You'll come back? Nadia said. Her voice was the voice of a child who has lost someone and knows what loss feels like and is assessing carefully. Fatu looked at her. She took her time before answering, because she was an honest woman and she did not make promises without being certain she could keep them. Yes, she said. I will come back. She was gone for 6 days. Tailor received a call on the 4th day from his lawyer who had begun the legal process for the financial restoration. The lawyer told him the paperwork would take 3 to 4 months to finalize and asked if he wanted to proceed. He said yes. He spent the 6 days working because work was the thing that had always organized his thoughts when his thoughts refused to organize themselves. He attended meetings and reviewed contracts and had the conversation with his aunt in Dakar about the Assini property and handled everything that required handling. He went home each evening to Nadia, who had been told that Fatu needed time for something personal and who had accepted this with a quiet that told him she was processing rather than panicking. He sat with her in the evenings. They ate together. He was present. On the 3rd evening, Nadia came to sit with him while he worked at his desk. She brought her cushion cover, the one she had made in the early weeks, and sat in the chair beside him and turned it over in her hands. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did you do something that hurt her?" Tailor put down his pen. He looked at his daughter. "No," he said. "I told her something that was difficult to hear, something she needed to know." Nadia thought about this. "But you told her because it was right, not because you wanted to hurt her?" "Yes." She turned the cushion cover over again. "Then she will come back," Nadia said. "If you did the right thing, she will come back because she is the kind of person who knows when someone has done the right thing." Tailor looked at his 5-year-old. He did not know what to say to that. He said, "When did you become so certain about things?" Nadia looked at him with those eyes. "I have always been certain," she said. "I just had to wait for the right things to be certain about." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and went back to work while she sat beside him, turning her cushion cover over in her hands, and the evening settled around them, and neither of them needed to say anything more. She knocked at the gate in the late afternoon. Madame Kesso let her in. She walked to the garden and sat on the low wall. Tailor came down when Madame Kesso told him she was there. He sat at a distance. She said, "My mother is the only family I have left close." I called her. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Your father did not die bitter. That is his answer." She paused. My mother said, "Whatever you decide, decide it as yourself. Not as Boubacar's daughter, as yourself." She looked at Tierno. She said, "I need to say something clearly. What happened to my father was wrong, and what you are doing to restore it is right, and those two things do not obligate me to feel any particular way about you." She met his eyes. "What I feel about you is separate from this entirely, and what I feel about this child is separate from both. I am telling you this so that there is no confusion about what I am choosing and why." He said, "Understood." She said, "I want to continue working here, for Nadia, not for any other reason, not yet." She watched him. "Can you accept that?" "Yes," he said. She nodded. "I also want the legal process to go directly to my mother, not to me. She needs it more than I do. She has been managing alone since my father died, and she will not ask anyone for anything." He said, "I will make sure of it." She said, "Good. Then that is settled." She stood up. She went to find Nadia. "You are still watching, which means this story has found you somewhere in the world. Before we reach the end, go to the pinned comment under this video and follow our Facebook page. We release new stories there first, and we want to make sure you do not miss what we are preparing. Follow us and then come back for the last part of this story. The months that followed were not the months of a romance the way stories usually tell romances. They were quieter than that, more particular, built from specific moments rather than a continuous movement forward. Fatu stayed. She continued caring for Nadia, continued the sewing in the garden during the hours when Nadia was at school or resting, continued the evenings on the low wall when Tierno came home and sat nearby, and they talked about things that were sometimes large and sometimes small and equally important for being both. Nadia grew, not physically only. She grew in the way that children grow when they have been given what they need, which is not expensive things but presence and honesty and the specific reassurance that the people around them are who they say they are. She finished her first proper sewing project in the 3rd month, a small cushion cover in yellow cotton with an uneven but genuine embroidered flower on one corner. She gave it to Tierno with the pride of someone who has made a thing and knows it is real. He put it on his desk. He put it on his desk and looked at it every morning. The legal process completed in the 4th month. Tierno's lawyer contacted Fatu's mother through the channels Fatu had provided and arranged the formal meeting. Fatu traveled to Bouaké to be present. She called Tierno afterward. She said, "My mother cried for an hour. Then she made tea and sat very straight and said that Boubacar would have said it was never about the money, but he would have appreciated the acknowledgement." She paused. Then she asked me who you were. I told her. She said, "A man who opens a box he has been afraid of for 3 years and does something difficult with what he finds inside is worth knowing." Tierno said, "Your mother sounds like your father." She said, "Yes. I get my patience from them both." There was a pause on the line. She said, "Tierno." He said, "Yes." She said, "I think I am ready for the regular thinking now." He understood what she meant. He had understood what she meant for some time. He said, "I am also ready." She came home to Abidjan the next day. She came back to the compound and to Nadia and to the garden. In the evening after Nadia was in bed, she sat on the low wall and he sat beside her and they talked until the stars were visible over the mango tree that had not yet given its mangoes but was, according to Tierno's estimate, about 1 month away. He told her, at some point in the evening, that he thought he had been falling in love with her since she had said, without looking up from her work, that his daughter saw things the way perceptive people saw them, and that perception like that usually meant a person who was very present and very alone. She said, "I know. I could see it. I was not ready then." He said, "And now?" She said, "Now I know who you are, not just what you are." She looked at him. "That is different." The proposal, if it could be called that, happened 6 months after Fatu came to the compound, and 1 month after the legal settlement was completed, and 2 weeks after the mango tree produced its first mangoes of the season. It happened in the garden because the garden was where everything important had happened between them, and it happened with Nadia present because Nadia had been present in one way or another for all of it. Nadia had known something was happening. She had been watching with the focused attention she brought to everything significant. When Tierno sat down with both of them on the low wall and said what he had been preparing to say, she sat very still with her hands in her lap. Fatu said yes. Nadia said, "I knew." Tierno looked at his daughter. "You knew since the first day," Nadia said, "when she sat with me and taught me the stitch." She looked at Fatu. "You smelled like mama. Not the same smell, but the same kind of smell. The kind that means you are safe." Fatu reached out and took Nadia's hand without speaking. They sat on the low wall in the garden with the mango tree behind them and the evening coming down over the compound and said nothing for a while. They did not need to. Some things settle into their correct position without requiring description. The wedding was small and correct. Fatu's mother came from Bouaké. Tierno's aunt and 2 cousins came from Dakar. Madame Kesso cried, which surprised everyone who had worked alongside her for years and had never seen her cry. She had tried to conceal it and had failed, which Fatu had noticed and had taken as a high compliment. Bertrand the assistant attended and was visibly moved, which he attempted to conceal without success. The garden was where it was held, because where else would it have been? Nadia wore a pale gold dress. She had sewn the hem herself, with Fatu's guidance, over the course of 3 evenings in the garden. It was uneven in one place by about half a centimeter. She knew this and had decided it was acceptable. She had said to Fatu while they were finishing it on the 3rd evening that the small imperfection made it hers in a way it would not be otherwise. Fatu had looked at her and said, "Your mother would have understood that completely." Nadia had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "Tell me more about the stitch for the corner." And Fatu had told her. At the reception in the compound garden, Nadia sat next to Fatu's mother and explained, in serious detail, the technique she had used for the hem. Fatu's mother listened with complete attention and asked 3 questions. Nadia answered each one precisely. "You sew the same way Fatu does," the old woman said finally. "From the fingers." Nadia considered this. "I learned from her," she said. Fatu's mother nodded. "Then you learned correctly." The old woman looked at Fatu across the garden. Fatu was talking with Tierno's aunt, laughing at something, her orange and blue wrapper replaced for the day with a cream and gold that she had made herself over the previous 2 weeks. The old woman watched her daughter the way mothers watch their children at important moments, with all the years of watching folded into the current one. "She looks like herself," the old woman said to Nadia. Nadia looked at Fatu. "Yes," she said. "She always has." The old woman looked at Nadia thoughtfully. "You knew her right away." "Yes," Nadia said. "From where?" Nadia thought about this with the seriousness she brought to real questions. "From the hands," she said, "the way she was working. And the way she looked up when I came. Most people look surprised when a child appears. She just looked like she was waiting. The old woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is very like her. She has always looked like she was waiting for the right thing rather than worried about what was coming." Nadia absorbed this. Then she said, "My mama was like that too. Not the sewing, but the looking. Like she already knew things were going to be all right." The old woman reached over and placed her hand briefly over Nadia's. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Tailor stood nearby, watching his daughter receive this attention, and felt the particular fullness that arrives when a thing is in the right place, not perfect. Not without history or difficulty or the specific weight of knowing what had been lost to arrive here, but right, in the way that things are right when they have been built honestly from whatever was actually available. He had opened a box he had been afraid of for 3 years. He had found something that required him to do a hard thing. He had done the hard thing. And on the other side of it was this. His daughter in a pale gold dress with an uneven hem that she had sewn herself, sitting in a garden where a mango tree had finally given its fruit, holding a serious conversation with an old woman from Boake about the correct angle for a hemstitch, while across the garden his wife laughed at something his aunt had said, and the evening light came down over the compound in the way that evening light comes over places where something right has finally found its position. He had not engineered any of this. He had only been willing to see it when it arrived, and to do what the seeing required, and to stay honest when honesty was the most difficult available option. That turned out to be enough. It was not a small thing. There is a version of this story that focuses on the money and the legal settlement and the restitution of what was wrongly taken. That is a true part of the story. It matters and it should be named. But the true center of it is a child on the side of a road in Ajame, reaching for something she recognized before anyone could have explained to her what she was recognizing. A child who had been very present in the world and very alone, choosing correctly, as children often do when they are given the chance. She had called every nanny a stranger, and then she had met a tailor on the street and refused to let her go. She had known what she was doing. She had just been waiting for everyone else to catch up. If this story found you today, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Every comment matters to us. Like this video, subscribe to Royal Secrets, and we will see you in the next one.